I'm so excited to dive into today's video where we are going to be talking about your assumptions about the zodiac signs and answering some of your questions about the zodiac signs, and just hopefully I'm going to bring you a little bit of clarity about the zodiac signs. So if you're interested in that, make sure you give this video a thumbs up and of course subscribe to my channel to show me that you support this kind of stuff. But otherwise, let's dive in. So if you don't know already, I have an Instagram account where I talk a lot about astrology mainly, and that's where I was asking you guys questions. So if you want to get in on this in the future, make sure you follow that account so you can participate in the different polls and whatnot that I like to share over there. So first, we're going to talk about Mars square Venus in the birth chart. So I see this coming out a lot as somebody whose actions, which is Mars, working against their values, which is Venus. So looking at that in a square, where square is like an external tension, whatever it is kind of like nagging you always in the back of your mind because you're not being satisfied 100% because these two functions are working against each other. When there are personal planets like Venus and Mars working against each other, this can feel like there's two different parts of you that are wanting one thing but doing something that isn't necessarily what it's going to take to get you what you want. This is also a common aspect for jealousy within somebody. Anytime that I see Mars and Venus come in contact at all, whether it's a Taurus Mars or a Libra Mars or a Scorpio Venus or an Aries Venus, or like I said, actually Venus contacting Mars by aspect, this does show an element of jealousy that shows somebody who wants to learn how to work in alignment with their values. Because a lot of the time, the underlying feelings of jealousy happen to be envy or wanting something that you think you're not allowed to have, but that's the other side of the jealousy, is learning that you're the one that's not allowing yourself to have it. Each house is related to each sign, but how are they different? So this is something I actually think is really intriguing because Aries in the first house overlap and Taurus in the second house overlap, etc., as well as planets. The first house can show Martial energy and then Venus energy in the second house. So those kind of things play out in the overall like themes, I guess, that you would see carried out. But when you look at the actual nitty-gritty about how they apply to certain things, that's where things get a little different. Because the actual function of what a house is versus the function of what a sign is are different things. Sign explains how that house energy functions, like what kind of characteristics it takes on, where the house itself tells you what area of life you're taking on. The first house is always about the self. It's always about how you want to assert yourself into situations and how you want to be seen and felt. However, if you throw a Virgo in the first house, that's going to be a lot more meticulous, a lot more methodical, and a lot more keen on the details rather than trying to be super first house oriented of just putting yourself out there on impulse. I mean, there might be impulse involved, but like I said, the sign is giving you the actual characteristics that you'll see on how these things might be played out. It's like the archetype, essentially. For example, when I experience a 7th house transit through Pisces, I also feel similar energy to how I feel when the sun is transiting through my 12th house, because that also emulates Pisces energy. But because it's actually in the 12th house of the subconscious, I'm a lot more likely to keep that more to myself, and rather than the Pisces energy in the 7th house, which is more focused on external connecting and relating with the world around me and people, because it's the 7th house. Next is, why are Virgo Mars the kinkiest? They should be the most methodical / non-experimental. Here's the thing that I find about like Mercury and Mars energy is that it is very adaptable and very changeable. Mercury rules Virgo. You put Mercury and Mars together, it's like a mind fuck. It's not meant to be this very like meticulous, methodical thing, which a lot of the time it can be with Virgo Mars, but it's more so like when they choose to have sex or who they choose to have sex with. But the actual sex itself will be hella kinky. Like, these people are very down to try anything as long as they feel like they're in the place to do it. And that's completely up to their discretion because Virgo is self-possessed. Okay, so next up we have a few questions about Chiron. So let's talk about Chiron real quick. So Chiron is an irrevocable wound within you that helps you see deeper into the complexities of life, shown by the sign that Chiron is in, and also the house placement in that area of life that Chiron is in. So I have Chiron in my 3rd house at 0 degrees Scorpio. So for me, because it's in the 3rd house, which rules communication and also how I'm able to make my own opinions, I do have an amount of wounding around that area of life. I'm very well versed in how you can wound other people by having your opinion and by coming from your your own perspective. And with it being in Scorpio, and even more with it being at 0 degrees, because 0 degrees would be the entire energy of that zodiac sign, this shows that I am very aware of the deeper, darker, more hidden emotional undertones that can come from, you know, these perspectives, like I said, because we're showing the characteristic with that Scorpio zodiac sign energy. So for me, I'm really very keenly aware of the complexities in my opinion, but at the same time that can also make me feel really left out and isolated and vulnerable with my opinion, you know, because I'm able to see so deeply into this inner woundedness of the human psyche, and that is what Chiron's all about. So in that question specifically was asking about Chiron in the first house, you know, that's going to be about yourself and how you feel about yourself, living out the specific archetype that is shown by your zodiac sign. So that's why it's almost important to dive into your Chiron placement almost just like a planet, so you can understand what it might be asking from you in that area, because otherwise you're going to have this place where you just never feel full inside, and nobody deserves to live like that. Now, when you have Chiron conjunct a planet, that shows an inner wounding you feel when expressing that planet's function. So for example, in this question, if we're talking, you know, Chiron conjunct Mars, this is being potent, you know, that's Mars energy, is asserting yourself, being potent and feeling like you are enough, if we're talking in Scorpio here. So it's like being able to feel potent within different power dynamics may not always be something you experience, and because of that you are deeply aware of the complexities within power dynamics and within finding your own sense of potency and sense of assertion within those dynamics. You see how those all kind of layer together? All right, next up is there a difference between the same sign, different month, like January versus February Aquariuses? Okay, this is something I literally made a post about the other day on my Instagram because I was getting a little annoyed seeing this like pop culture trend of astrology, which always seems to give us a bad rep, where people are like, oh, well, January Aquariuses are like this, but the February ones, they're like this. And it's like this whole like either or thing, which is funny because it's kind of accurate, but not completely. Enough for me to feel happy about it. So honestly, in my opinion, I think people are picking up on decans, which every zodiac sign is split into 3 decans, which makes the energy of that zodiac sign sub-ruled by another planet. So for example, Virgo is ruled by Mercury, but Virgo can also be sub-ruled by other planets like the Sun, Venus, or Mercury. So you see how things are going to play out a little bit different. I tell people to almost look into the aspect of those 2 planets in conjunction so you can see how on top of that sign energy, like how this energy might play out in your life. But as far as it being separated from one month to the next, I mean, it's kind of relevant because if we're thinking in almost 10-day increments, that would bring it relatively close to splitting in half. But like I said, there's 3 decans, so they're kind of missing a part of it. Next question is any link between parents and children's signs? So what I always like to say when I read charts is that charts echo the same tune throughout them. So even if you have different planets in completely different signs and aspects or whatever, you can still find similarities in between the energies that you're seeing playing out. And I find that even applies to different family members. I actually dive more into this on a personal level on my Patreon, trying to relate this more fluidly because there is a lot to grasp here. But when you look into your personal zodiac chart, your moon function and your feminine function, so also Venus and Neptune, represent feminine energy. So basically how you perceived your mother or the feminine energies around you. And then energies like the sun or Mars or Jupiter would represent the masculine or your father energy that you were around. In that regard, it's easy to kind of see the relations within their chart. A lot of the time it won't be the necessarily same aspect, but you can find the same energies portraying themselves in different ways. Thankfully, you know, with that switch up of not displaying themselves exactly the same helps you creatively start to solve problems that you gain throughout your family line. So that's kind of like a little side note to that. Difference between tropical and sidereal astrology. So this is what's kind of interesting because I feel like people almost use this as an excuse to invalidate astrology, but here's the thing, it's different routes to pretty much the same thing. And I love this about the way that sidereal and tropical kind of come together is that, well, okay, first, before I get ahead of myself, let me just say that tropical and sidereal astrology are just calculated differently, essentially. Like, I'm pretty sure sidereal uses like a fixed star system that keeps them back signs, which honestly is kind of interesting. I don't think it really changes the essence of somebody so much because the signs always dive into each other more. Because if anything, looking at the two placements that you have can kind of help deepen your understanding of the complexities that you might be experiencing. Like, for example, in sidereal astrology, I'm a Leo sun, Leo rising, and a Virgo moon, which I can see how that makes a lot of sense, honestly, like in my chart, but I also see how I'm a very much a Virgo sun, Virgo rising, and a Libra moon, you know? That makes sense to me too. But I'm also somebody that has a lot of room for ambiguity because I can see the different facets of myself playing out in different ways, and I can see how it can be interpreted different ways too, which I actually find a lot of the time sidereal does tend to use a different way of interpreting. A lot of the sidereal astrologies that I see use Vedic astrology, which to me is just a much deeper way of reading energy than what we use for tropical astrology. So like, I don't even see it really as the same thing, but like I said, if anything, it's like a different route to get to the kind of same thing, which is fine by me. I don't really take any side other than I just use tropical because that's what people around here use and are used to. So I mean, that's okay with me. However, I have spent a pretty big chunk of time studying sidereal and more specifically Vedic astrology, which, like I said, hits the essence of astrology a lot better than I think Western society can right now, just from where we're at. All right, next little assumption we're going to talk about is Cancer is the most manipulative sign and the worst at accountability. And honestly, it's kind of true. I hate to dog people like that because I think we all are capable of doing all of that, and it really just depends on your full chart. But if we look at the archetype of Cancer, it's your personal emotions. It's very private and it's very indirect. It's not wanting to deal with things with other people necessarily, because it's like, if I can keep this within myself and keep my inner world intact, I'll be fine. But it's like, not always what's comfortable for other people, and it's not always what makes people feel comfortable connecting with you too. It's hard to really call a sign themselves the most manipulative because I think the planets' energies and the prominence of those planets are going to show more about how manipulation is playing out within the person. But I do think Cancer can have a tendency to be kind of unconsciously manipulative because they're so hyper-focused on their own place, not really recognizing that there's a whole world out there that could use them sometimes. Especially their accountability, which Cancer is just always so good at being the one where it's like, I'm sorry I made you feel that way, or I'm sorry you felt like that, instead of just being like, I'm sorry I did that. Yeah, that's a Cancer thing for sure. Also a Leo thing too, but like a Cancer thing for sure. All right, let's talk about the best match for Gemini and why does everyone say Gemini is a bad idea or Gemini is bad in general? Well, hear me out here. Gemini, I think the reason people get so confused about Gemini is because Gemini is kind of confused about where they're coming from, but they're so confident that they're not, because they're, like I've always said, the learning consciousness. There's no shame really, I feel like, for a lot of Geminis to learn their lessons, to do the things that they need to do to learn their lessons, to experience the things they need to do to learn their lessons. The energy of trying everything once. So I feel like some people in their minds don't feel comfortable with that because it's like, I want to feel secure in what I've chosen here, and there's a certain fluidity in a Gemini that's not comfortable to people, because if we look at the context of it, it is mutable air, so it's like changeable thoughts, and changeable thoughts means instability and flexibility on the part of other people because you're changing your mind all the time. So when you come from that place, a lot of people can just have a hard time feeling safe by that energy, I guess, or like feeling like they can really trust it, because like I said, it doesn't seem to really hold its ground very well because it's trying to move on. That being said, some of the best matches for Gemini are more stable forces or people that can help you bring more stability to your awareness. So this can be water signs or earth signs or even fire signs. Honestly, you can do any sign with this, I feel like, because Gemini is so versatile, and it's just a willingness if they actually want to learn from this person or not. All right, who are the 3 fakest and inauthentic signs or rising signs for you? So going off of what we just said, Gemini, Sagittarius rising as well, and then probably a Pisces rising, which I kind of feel a little sad to say because I love me a Pisces rising, but there is just such a self-sacrificing element to Pisces, which if you look how things fall naturally, that puts Leo in the 6th house, which is authenticity, being in the 6th house of refinement. So they're not really trying to be authentic a lot of the time, and they are just trying to be whatever situations need them to be. And that's also reflective in Gemini and Sagittarius. But what you see with Gemini or Sagittarius risings, because you have Gemini or Sagittarius on the 1st or 7th house, is a lot of real inflexibility when it comes to other people's viewpoints and vantage points, because you're so focused on having yours be seen, or sometimes being defended, which isn't always what's necessary. Like sometimes you can just stand in your right and you don't really need to logically like express why that's okay, you know? If anything, when you start having to express why it's okay that you're doing what you're doing, to some people it feels more inauthentic, because it's like, if you feel like you have to try to convince yourself to be this way, maybe you're just not actually this way and you're just trying to go through the motions of becoming that way, which is fine, but you have to have humility in recognizing that, and Gemini, Sagittarius risings just don't sometimes. And like I said, I don't think Pisces even recognizes when they're not authentic, because they're just genuinely not trying to be a lot of the time. Authenticity is a little stressful for a Pisces rising, and that's fine because they have a lot of rules to play. Aqua Venus in bed. So let me just say, there's two different types here. Obviously, we have the masculine energy and the feminine energy coming into contact with this. So if you're more of a masculine energy with Aquarius Venus, the chances of you being more of the human hater when it comes to women are probably more likely, where you're just expecting them to take on their specific role and have a like-minded vision of how you're supposed to do the deed, so to speak. They would have just assumed that you are their fantasy to be recreated at their own disposal, which, like, you can guess how that might go for some people. Versus an Aqua Venus in a more feminine type, I would say would be somebody that is adventurous and more willing to step outside of the box and try different things with different sorts of people. Definitely comes off as a bit of an elitist though, like they're only like the best people that can be with these people for some reason, but whatever. Next, what would you consider to be the darkest Pluto placement? Honestly, I feel like Pluto in either the 7th house or the 10th house can be a really dark placement in terms of how they're able to move throughout the world, because there's a lot of resentment that you'll see with people that have even the Pluto towards like the cusp, even if it's, you know, more in the 9th house or more in the 6th house. Like if your Pluto is near those angles, a lot of the time there is just such a deep resentment towards humanity and other people in a way that is so unconscious. A lot of the time that these people feel almost justified in kind of crucifying other people, honestly. But it's when you learn that you don't necessarily have a right to that, and it's more so learning you have a right to change yourself, to get yourself into better environments that suit the kind of personal empowerment you want to have. I would say that's where things can sort of level out and find their bliss here. All right, next up is best moon combo for intimate relationships. I would say honestly that this has something to do with the 8th house, because 8th house does rule like intimacy and whatnot. Somebody has their moon on your south node, or moon in your 4th house or 7th house or 8th house. Like those seem like really comfortable moon placements to me, so I would look for people in that kind of area. Next up is thoughts on Libra's sun in bed. This is actually kind of a funny one, because if we look into how this all works, so if we look at the sun as your ego expression and how you feel you are, the sun actually comes into its fall in Libra because it is all about the other, about relating to other people. So a lot of the time you see Libra sun people feeling inadequate and like they have to overextend themselves to people, or basically become some type of mistress, essentially, where you are just pleasing people on all the areas that they need to be pleased, instead of really recognizing your own ability to please yourself and feel confident in that. And because Libra is a cardinal air sign, these people can be really in their heads and very like fantasizing about things, so they can dream about having sex with someone for so long, and then when they actually do, they kind of blow it. Or it becomes something they weren't expecting because they were so fantasizing about it in their head. Next is, what are the pros and cons of square aspects and the best way to handle the energy? So honestly, like I was saying earlier, squares are external tension that are just always kind of picking at your brain, where it's like this isn't being satisfied for some reason. And like I said, it's because you're not working with your energy in some kind of way. However, with squares, because of this tension that's created constantly, you're almost more driven to take care of the problem because you feel that it's a problem. So honestly, when I see squares in people's charts, I'm always more apt to encourage them in that area of life because they're more likely to be encouraged in that. Comparing it to oppositions, I'd say oppositions are definitely easier to synthesize because they're inside out versions of each other, but when it comes to squares, they have the same modality, so they're working at the same speed, but they might have completely different ideas of how to do what they're doing. So let's say you have a Libra Venus square a Capricorn Neptune. You know, you might experience a feeling of profound love and you want to experience the depths of love. But on the contrary, there's some deep societal ties you have about how you're supposed to move about your life in a spiritually oriented way. You know, if you look at Capricorn as being like a structure or being really methodical and hardworking about things, when you put that into spirituality and glamour and all that sort of thing, with that being square, this actual way that you want to relate and share with people that you see in that Libra Venus, instead of that earthy water combo that you see over there, it's more of an airy energy that is wanting more of its independence and more of its own appreciation separate from the group, which Neptune square Venus isn't always going to want things to be separate. It's going to almost drive you to feel like you need to be connected to something deeper than yourself. That's Neptune's influence. So like I said, this irritation within you is supposed to help you learn how to fix the problem. And essentially that's the pro to having squares in your chart, is this is probably a problem you're going to have to fix within your life, which just helps you evolve your consciousness. So snaps for that. We all love to see it. Okay, and last but not least, let's talk about that Saturn returns are nothing but torture, currently in one and constantly scared. So let's talk about Saturn returns a little bit, because I feel like they can seem a lot more foreboding than what they actually should. Because if we look into Saturn is the maturation process of the human condition. You know, when we go through our Saturn squares, it's essentially a point in our lives where we mature and level up a little bit. For example, I went through a Saturn square when I was like 13 years old, and I just went through another one again when I turned 21 and until I turned like 23. So like those were moments in my life where I had to reorganize and restructure my life in ways that showed me that I was my own inner authority. And that's what Saturn is asking for us. And diving more specifically into Saturn in Aquarius, since that's what we're going through right now, Saturn in Aquarius calls for you to be not only your own inner authority, but one that knows how to be a weirdo in progressive ways that help you find people like you and help you get the help that you need. Because if you look at Aquarius, it's resources. It's being resourceful. It's being mindful that you have a community around you to help you and help guide you in a progressive way. We're talking fixed air here. So this is a fixed idea that is going to get you somewhere else. Well, when you have decided on this new fixed idea that's going to take you somewhere else, you can go somewhere with it, you know? So if you feel like you're constantly scared, I feel like that's Saturn coming in to say, you know, where's the work you're doing? You know, prove to yourself the work you're doing. Prove to yourself that you are your own inner authority, and you know, take the level up that's being offered to you right now, because that's what Saturn's handing you. As much as it can be a little slap on the ass and telling you to get your ass in gear, you know, it's still something that's getting you motivated in some way, shape, or form. And when you try to see that more as a blessing rather than, you know, a curse of your circumstances, you start to see that there are actually some level ups that are being offered to you within these circumstances that seem like restrictions or delays, which Saturn rules. But I think that concludes this little Q&A about answering your assumptions about the zodiac signs and whatnot. So if you want to see another one of these from me, I would love to do it, honestly. If you want to leave your questions or comments down below, feel free to do that. Otherwise, check me out on my other social medias, linked down below as always, and I will see you guys in a later video. Peace.